سيدنا ورسوله الكريم وآله وصحبه أجمعين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد، يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير. وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال: قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: إن الله طيب لا يقبل إلا طيبا، وإن الله أمر المؤمنين بما أمر به المرسلين فقال تعالى: يا أيها الرسل كلوا من الطيبات واعملوا صالحا. وقال تعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم. ثم ذكر الرجل يطيل السفر أشعث أغبر يمد يديه إلى السماء: يا رب يا رب، ومطعمه حرام ومشربه حرام وملبسه حرام وغذي بالحرام فأنى يستجاب له. رواه Muslim. All praises to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that accepts only the tayyib, the goodness and the pure. We've been talking about the encouragement of physical health by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Quranic principles around our bodies being on loan from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're in a manner, and that we should look after them for that sake, but also for the sake of our souls. That there's moderation in everything. There's this qasd. The Prophet ﷺ told us to be people of moderation, people of the middle way. Al-qasd, al-qasd. They said about the Prophet ﷺ, his khutbahs were moderate. His prayers were moderate, i.e. when he was leading the prayer or he was speaking in people. But also, food needs to be in moderation. We need to have food. We need to have strength. Right? There's so many sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ surrounding how we eat and how we deal with food and how we should nourish our bodies and how we should have intention that this food nourishes our body for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But not all food is good, and too much food can be bad, and too little food can be bad. So it's a constant balancing. It's a constant balance that we need to try and address, like all the balance within our lives. Moderation doesn't mean less than good. Moderation is an excellence, and this is what the difference. We are a deen of moderation because of its excellence. It's hard to be moderate. It's hard to be moderate. Like Winnicott talked about parenting, saying that just good enough parenting. That's enough to give someone a stable home. Well, it's not just about just being good enough. It means about not being too overly strict with the child, not being underly, not having boundaries. There's a moderation, but this moderation is difficult to gain. So anyway, I was just going to mention, I'm going to do a brief khutbah today so that we don't overrun. I'll just mention the hadith that I mentioned in Arabic, that indeed Allah is tayyib. Right? He's good, He's pure, and He doesn't accept anything other than that. And Allah has ordered the believing people by what He's also ordered the messengers. And He says to the messengers, subhanahu wa ta'ala, O you messengers, eat from that thing which is good, and do a righteous action. And He says to the believing people, O you people who believe, eat from the good things that you have been provided. And so He's ordering the messengers, and the Prophet ﷺ is saying, look, He's ordering the messengers, the best of creation, and He's also ordering all of you people who believe with the same thing, to eat from those things which are good and do good actions, i.e., in order to get to the point of good action, there's a starting point. You've got to think about what you're eating and what you're putting into your bodies. And then He mentioned a man who's been on a long journey, and he's dishevelled from that, and he's stretching his hands to the sky and saying, oh my Lord, yet his food is haram, his drink is haram, his clothes are haram, he's nourished by haram. Is it that he will be answered? I.e., will his dua be answered? It's a rhetorical question. So he's got all the conditions of what is mustajab dua. Right? We know the traveller the dua is answered. We know someone who's on that journey is it's been answered. We know if you stretch your hands, like the Prophet ﷺ said, no one stretches their hands up to the skies except they will be filled. You know, that's a guarantee from the Prophet ﷺ, that when we do that. And he's calling upon his Lord, oh my Lord, oh my Lord. So he's got all the conditions of what would suffice an answered dua. But what he's eaten has been haram, his clothes are haram, right? So, i.e., no, the dua is not going to be accepted, even though he does everything else. It shows the importance of keeping the rizq halal. Of keeping the rizq halal. That's why as a Muslim community, we're so particular. People get annoyed with us sometimes. Why do you have to be so pernickety? Why do you have to be so difficult? Why do you have to travel across the whole of the city? Alhamdulillah, now it's not so difficult. But we still have pockets of our communities across the country who have to travel an hour, 2 hours to get halal meat. But they do it. Some people are very particular about the butchers they go to. Some people have to see the dhabh happening. Some people are so particular that they have to see the sacrifice happening. Now people might say that's too much. That's too much. You have to have, you rely on some people. But you only rely on people when you know that there's goodness in the community. If there's some corruption or there's people that lie or that they put the halal certificate, it's not halal, then that's it, you're in trouble, because how is your dua going to be accepted? And this is for a person who intentionally or is not intentional in terms of what they're eating is haram. It's still what's nourishing you. And it doesn't mean that all your prayers won't be accepted, but it means there won't be a kamal of your prayer. There's something that's taken away from your prayer, whether that's reward or completeness or what have you. So I'm talking to myself first, but all of you, that the first step to thinking about diet and to thinking about our health. So we've talked about, what have we talked about? We've talked about sleep, we've talked about water and hydration, and now we're going on to a food which is a lot larger of a topic. But we have to make sure first and foremost that whatever that is from a halal income. That food is from a place of goodness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't accept it unless it's tayyib. And He mentions this depends on, it doesn't matter whether it's your speech, whether it's your belief, whether it's your actions, whether it's food, it has to be tayyib for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept it. Like in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about وَلَيْهِ يَسْعَدُ الْكَلِمُ الطَّيِّبُ وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُهُ, that the speech, the good speech and the good actions are raised to him. And he also talks in the Quran subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَالشَّجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ. Have you not seen how Allah has given the example of a good word from, or like a good tree? Its roots are in the earth, but its branches are in the skies. Right? And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma said that this kalima is la ilaha illallah, and the tree is the mu'min, is the believing person. So just saying la ilaha illallah, I say just saying, from the shop of iman, from the branches of faith, that the best of it, there are 60 so branches of faith, the best of it is saying la ilaha illallah. Light on the tongue but heavy on the scale. The least of it is removing difficulties or obstacles from the streets of the Muslims. So that's why you see the Salihin, when they're cleaning the streets and they're getting the twigs or the stones away, as they're doing it, they're saying La ilaha illallah. Why? So that they get the rewards of all of the branches of faith. They hope for everything in between those two actions. So I know I'm going to keep the khutbah short, because I know that for some people the asr time comes earlier than for the ahnaf. But even the ahnaf, we know that Abu Yusuf Imam Muhammad is still of the opinion of the one mithal. So we need to be mindful of those people who follow that thought. And we'll finish early, inshallah. Next week we will start 15 minutes earlier, so that we ensure that that is the case.